Hey, this is Adam with Dusterhoff Racing. Today we're going to show you how to install our Stage 2 cam package. This is a springs required package, so it's a little more in-depth than our Stage 1. We estimate this job to take about 18 hours depending on experience, so let's get started. Step 1 is to disconnect and isolate the negative battery cable. First, I remove the intake tube along with the PCV purge control. Now you can remove the accessory drive belt. With that out of the way, you can remove the Supercharger belt. Remove the fuel rail covers and the PCV line. This car has an aftermarket catch can that replaces the factory PCV line. Now you can remove the brace that attaches the cowl. Remove all the connectors that connect to the Supercharger and snout. Next, you can remove the Supercharger bolts that bolt the Supercharger to the cylinder head. The one in the back on the passenger side is the hardest to get out. You'll have to move the Supercharger forward before you can fully remove it. Carefully pry up on the front of the Supercharger to release it from the dowels. I like to use a block of wood to hold the front of the Supercharger up. It makes it easier to access the coolant lines that run to the water pump. Now we can go underneath to remove the service panel and the belly pan. First, you disconnect the coolant lines from the radiator. Now you can remove the bracket that holds the radiator and condenser to the core support. Drop the bracket out of the way and be ready to support the radiator, condenser, and fan assembly. There's 4 bolts that hold the condenser to the front of the radiator. 2 of them are up high. They're a lot easier to get to if you lower the radiator and fan assembly down and tilt it back towards the engine. Now you can drop the radiator and fan out as one assembly. I like to zip tie the condenser up just so it's not hanging on the lines. Now you can get your impact in there so you can get the crank bolt out of the way. Next, I remove the alternator. There's one bolt that goes to the motor mount that's kind of a pain to get to if you don't have the cylinder heads off. Now we're removing the timing cover. There's 5 bolts that go from the oil pan, and then the rest are on the front. Next thing I'll remove is the timing cover, pry it off to break the seal. Unbolt the fuel rails from the Supercharger. You could also disconnect the main fuel feed line if that's easier for you. We remove the Supercharger because it gives us more room to work. You could get away with not fully removing it to get this job done. Remove the rest of the cold air intake and then the coolant overflow tank. This gives you room to get to the coils on the driver's side. Remove the 4 driver's side coil packs. Remove the fuel injector harness clips from the valve covers. Now you can unbolt the valve cover. You can repeat this process for the other side. I loosen the front spark plug in every cylinder. This allows you to still be able to turn the motor over when the valves are closed. Also, you'll use that to pressurize the system when you're doing the valve springs later. Next, we can unbolt the rocker arm assemblies. Remove all 16 push rods. Reinstall the balancer bolt so you can spin the motor over until number 1 is top dead center on the compression stroke. The factory mark on the cam gear will be facing straight up. You can't see the factory mark on the bottom gear with the oil pump and pan installed, so I add my own marks to the chain next to the guides so that I know the chain hasn't skipped a tooth on the bottom sprocket. Keep tension on the chain when you remove the phaser gear and try to prevent it from skipping a tooth on the bottom sprocket. Spin the camshaft over by hand to make sure that all the lifters are up in the bore. Next, remove the camshaft retention plate. I stick the cam bolt back in to give me some leverage because you're gonna have to lift up on it, trying not to nick the bearings on the way out. Lift up on the cam and work it out past all the bearings. You can put assembly lube, or I just put motor oil on the new camshaft to get ready to stick it back in the block. Try not to nick the bearings up as you're working the camshaft back in. You use the bolt on the front to kind of hold it up to clear the bearings. The dowel will be facing up along with the mark on the sprocket, and you put the cam gear back on. And we'll put the cam plate back in place. Next, we're going to do the VVT lockout from Comp Cams. It comes with the tool to hold the spring in place. There's 2 pins. The tool goes around one, and then there's another that you can see here. Make sure you do not remove the pin that the tool is not touching. You'll have to loosen it a little bit so you can slide the plate out of the way. Remove the pin that is under the tool and not the other pin. You can slide the lockout tool in. And put all the bolts back in. Once you get them all tight, you can remove the comp tool. Now we can reinstall the upper sprocket. I line my own marks that I made up with the mark on the sprocket itself so that I know that it's in the same position that I took it off. Remove one spark plug from each cylinder and rotate that cylinder until it's at top dead center. Then, using a compression tester, pressurize each cylinder with an air compressor so that the valves don't fall down as you're removing the valve springs. Install your valve spring compressor tool and compress the spring until you can remove the keepers with a magnet. After you remove the keepers, loosen the valve spring compressor tool so that you can pull out the spring and the retainer. You will reuse the keeper and the factory retainers. Install the new spring with the factory retainer. Compress until you can see the grooves at the top of the valve stem. Reinstall the keepers and make sure they are flush up against the valve stem. Note that the keepers are wedge-shaped and can only go in one direction. Loosen the spring compressor tool and make sure that the keepers are seated. Repeat on the exhaust side. The exhaust side being so close to the firewall makes it a lot more complicated. I use a dab of grease in the keepers so that they stick to the valve stem. This helps prevent you dropping them because they're very hard to find if you do. Repeat this process 1 cylinder at a time for the remaining 7 cylinders. I put a dab of oil on each one of the rocker arm pedestals. Install your new push rods. The longer push rods go on the exhaust side. Reinstall the rocker arm assemblies and torque them from the inside out. The intake ones are marked with an I, and the exhaust ones don't have any markings on them. Install your spark plugs. I use a dab of NICs on each. This car is getting new spark plugs, but just reinstall your old ones if you're reusing them. Install new gaskets on valve covers, then reinstall the valve covers. Reinstall your coil packs. So where the timing cover, the block, and the oil pan all meet, you want to clean that up and put a bead of super black RTV. Then with a new gasket, you can put the timing cover back on. Install a new front crankshaft seal. Now I'm bolting the AC compressor back up to the timing cover. Next, I'm going to do the water pump with a new gasket. Then the alternator. Clean up the cylinder heads so you can install your supercharger with new gaskets. Torque the supercharger to the cylinder heads using the sequence shown above. Now you can slide the injectors in one side at a time and line the mounting holes up. Insert the bolts back into the supercharger. And now you repeat the same process on the other side. First, route and install your new supercharger belt. Next, you can do your accessory drive belt. Reinstall the fan and radiator. I do it as one assembly and use zip ties to hold the bottom bracket on until I have it bolted all together. Now you can reinstall all your cooling hoses cold air intake. Thanks for watching. If you found this video helpful, we do have other install videos, so feel free to check those out as well. And if you have any questions about this cam package or any of our others, feel free to reach out and we'd be more than happy to help.